Here's a little bit of a blast from the past. This is a CJ. I used to drive a CJ in high school, and I think sitting out in the rain for years, this one has shrunk. I can't be any bigger, right? So looking around this thing really brings back a lot of memories. Notice that we're using a Sagna steering column, which is a GM component. A lot of guys don't know that over the years, Jeeps have incorporated a lot of GM components. So what we're doing by putting the LSs in is really not that unusual. Back when AMC owned Jeep, and you can see the little logo here, they actually sourced parts from a lot of different companies, including Ford and General Motors. We got I believe this is a 3 on the floor. If you remember, the earlier cars, we used to have a 3 on the tree. So let's go for a little ride. We just put some new mirrors on this CJ, no power brakes. Really shows how far we've come with these Wranglers, and I think that's a little bit what I'll talk about. Really, when Jeep came out with the Wrangler, and let's even go back further than that. Let's go back to World War II, when the Willys was designed and Ford built them. These were really half-ton utility vehicles to haul stuff like GIs and equipment. They really weren't intended to be used a lot on the highway. After the war, Jeeps became popular in the civilian market, and eventually Jeep came out with the CJ, the civilian Jeep, which is what I'm driving down. They ran this all the way up through the 1980s. So this thing is no ball of fire. That's floored right there in 3rd gear. And what the intention was to have enough horsepower to get your Jeep or your Wrangler to the trail. And then once you got on the trail, it didn't really matter how much horsepower you have. And that worked great for a lot of years. I do believe eventually when they went to the Wrangler JK in 2007, we've got a fire-breathing V8 Jeep behind me. When Chrysler released the JK in 2007, I think something unintended happened. They put the small Caravan 3.8 engine in the JK, which was a fine engine. It really wasn't a bad engine. The transmission was dated even for that time. So the 4-speed transmission really took its toll on the small displacement engine. The power that it had, which was just over 200, was not a lot. And what was left after that got used up on the drivetrain. So the Wrangler JK, the early ones, were not really that well suited for the highway. But going back to Jeep's philosophy of just having enough power to get to the trail, that worked for a lot of guys. But what ended up happening is when they came out with the 4 doors, that would be the Wrangler Unlimited, it basically took the Wrangler from a special purpose off-road vehicle to an SUV. So now we've got the Wrangler in the same category as a Land Rover or a Toyota Land Cruiser. And guys expected it to have power. They wanted to go 70, 80 miles an hour on the highway with their families, and it just wasn't going to happen with a V6. So the philosophy of the old Willys and the old CJs really went out the window when the Wrangler JK came out in 2007. Now we had a multi-purpose vehicle, a vehicle that could not only off-road with live axles, but had the horsepower. So unlike the earlier TJs, LJs, CJs, the 4-door Wrangler was really thrust into a new category, and that was the family SUV. When I bought my 09 Wrangler, the first thing we did was loaded it up and hit the trail. It was really a disaster. We tried to get it to New York, and just going through Utah in the 80-mile-an-hour zone, it was woefully apparent that it was lacking on horsepower. When we got back to Las Vegas, I had a decision to make, either sell the Jeep or upgrade it. The thing I liked about the Wrangler was, unlike the 4Runner and some of the other SUVs available at the time, like the Land Rovers, it had solid axles, full frame. It was very good construction for off-road. It was solid. I didn't want to go to a unibody. I didn't want to go to independent front suspension. And that's really how Motec started, was taking basically a good platform and putting enough power in it to do what it's got to do. Now, I did work on Hemis back then, and we did install Hemis in Wranglers, but I always felt that the LS made a better choice than the Hemi for its size and its weight and cooling ability and power and everything else. Another big part of it was the transmission. After World War I and then Korea, my dad was in the National Guard. He drove a Willie's Jeep. In fact, he bought a Willie's Jeep in a crate, surplus from the Army, and they were pretty dangerous on the highway. They were roll bait. They had high centers of gravity. Really 40 to 50 miles an hour was the end of the world. And once you got it off-road, it was great. You can go back and watch some of these videos of Rubicon from back in the day, and they actually wheeled really well. They're very primitive. This one here with a 3-speed transmission. A shifter that looks like it's got no torque, so you got to have it in the right gear. This shifter looks like it's something out of Rat Fink. What we've gone from is basically a utility vehicle that was intended to haul supplies and people off-road to a family SUV that now is expected to not only haul you and your family, but off-road with the capabilities of the old Wranglers. Now obviously a 7,000 pound JK fully loaded is not going to go down the trail the same as this old CJ or an old Willys. These are just diminutive in size and weight compared to that. But once you get it on the highway, that JK will go 70, 80 miles an hour and cruise in comfort with air conditioning, cruise control, and all the creature comforts you expect. Where this CJ, that's just not going to happen. We have upgraded several TJs, LJs, CJs, you name it. And get the sucker in a second. And even when you put the V8s in them with the leaf springs, you just don't have that same level of comfort on the highway. The ride isn't as good. Spilling those hydrocarbons, it's really bringing back the memories. Very primitive dash. The OS bar. I could tell you stories. I remember one of my friends had a CJ7. We used to call it roll bait. He had the big AMC V8 in it, which is rated at like 160 horsepower. And every time that thing went off camber, it'd roll over on its side. And I used to pull him back on his wheels with my Toyota pickup truck. So I feel that one of the reasons the JK is so popular is the fact that it still maintains the origin and the roots of these old utility purpose vehicles, meaning off-road, full frame, live axle, reliability. You're able to really beat them up off-road. They're going to be more reliable than the other SUVs out that have air suspension systems, unibody, modules everywhere. Now, don't get me wrong, the new JLs have a lot of modules, and we're starting to approach that law of diminishing returns when it comes to reliability, in my opinion. Melding the creature comforts of the JK with the reliability of the live axle suspension has really taken the JK into the future, and I'm really glad that Chrysler has chosen to keep that with the JL and the JT. So as crude as this Jeep is, this really was a civilian Jeep, and the Willys were even more primitive than this. And if you try to compare any of these to a modern JK, there really is no comparison. The JK with its leather interior and power windows and air conditioning is really a nice vehicle, but it still has maintained its roots in the functionality that this Jeep was intended for. And I see why the JK market is so popular. So we're going to be coming back with some really interesting JK builds. Stay tuned.